So most people think that a community school is about programs and services, right? And they're like, a community school, you know, they give food and they give clothes and they have after-school programs, and that's kind of what's most visible about a community school. So in the community, I think most people think that that's what it is. But community schools is really, it's a strategy, it's not a program. So a lot of people think you have a school and you bring in community schools and it's like bringing in a program. But the community school strategy is an equity strategy for transforming education, okay? A little bit about the history of community schools. They've actually been around for a really long time, and they were born out of the social work movement. Okay, so the settlement houses that they had during the social work movement were places where, in really impoverished areas, they helped people to collectively organize, you know, build kind of like kinship networks. They would help people to organize like childcare rings and things like that, and community gardens. It was about empowering communities. And in these settlement houses was where the idea of community schools was born. And they started talking about, well, hey, that kind of makes sense, right? Like, where do all of our kids and families go every day? They go to the schools. So doesn't it make sense to have what communities need at schools, right? Located at the schools, and for the schools to partner with the community in making sure that the community has what it needs. So community schools has kind of waxed and waned over time in terms of how many community schools that we have in the United States. And people say, well, why is that? Community schools is actually a pretty highly political strategy, okay? So it depends, you know, kind of someone's ideology and their political beliefs, you know, how much we believe in helping the poor or providing services, if that makes sense. And so that's the reason why we've kind of seen this, you know, waxing and waning over time of how many community schools that we have. But in the 1990s was when we really saw this resurgence of interest in community schools, where people started saying, hey, you know, let's start getting this going again. The teachers union, NEA, is extremely active and supportive of community schools, and they actually provided Las Cruces with the seed money to get community schools started. So at the current state, you know, we have a partnership with the city of Las Cruces, and we have a partnership board. So we're kind of externalizing some of, I don't know if control is the right word, but, you know, oversight and advisement of community schools back out into the community, right? And so as I explain more about it, we'll talk a little bit about collaborative leadership and what is that kind of equity piece of the strategy of community schools. So there's supposed to be a video here, but I get a D- for technology. So, oh no, this one isn't the video, but we'll see if the video comes. So why does this community school matter? You know, a lot of our kids, the barriers to them learning, right, the barriers to them being academically successful are things that are happening not just at home, but in the communities that they come from, right? And, you know, those of us that work in education have, you know, and especially for a while, we lived through the punitive evaluation systems, which was really horrible. You know, they were punishing teachers for their children, their students not learning, not achieving, not, you know, reaching benchmarks on standardized testing, as if the teacher could fix what was going on in kids' homes and in their communities that was causing these barriers to them being academically successful, right? Unfortunately, many teachers were punished, right, who worked in impoverished schools or, you know, with communities where there was a lot of community problems and community stress and ACEs. And so the second picture is kind of a depiction of that, right? What do you do? What are we doing wrong, right? I hear people saying that all the time. What is wrong with public education? What is wrong? Why is New Mexico 50th in education? Is it our education system? We're 50th in a lot of things. We are. Or number one, if it's like a not good thing, right? Right? We're not just 50th in education. I mean, we're always kind of neck and neck with Mississippi. It's like us and Mississippi, right? Who's struggling, kind of. Right, we're a very poor state. We are a very poor state, right? Our economy has always struggled. We don't have a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of economic growth. You know, states that have more money, they have more money to invest in a lot of things that are protective for communities. And that is what it is, right? You know, we live in a state that, you know, economically and otherwise, we have a lot of challenges. And so public schools are being charged with having to fix these problems. And, you know, public schools say we can't. We can't, but maybe we can, right? Maybe we can operate schools differently. Maybe we can look at schools differently and partner with communities to work on some of this, right? So a lot of this, I'm probably like preaching to the choir, right? About 30% of our students live below the poverty level, and this is statewide. It's actually a lot higher down here because a lot of this is capturing the wealth up north that we don't have down here. So when we're looking at statewide data, it's important to remember that a statewide statistic usually is higher down here, okay? Because, you know, in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, there is a lot more wealth and it skews those statistics. Down here, much more of our children live in poverty. In fact, almost all of our schools are FRP schools, free and reduced price lunch. Title I schools, that means 80% or more of the students live in poverty, and quite a few of our schools, 100% of the students live in poverty. In New Mexico, there's over 400 of these FRP schools. Okay, our goal with community schools is that by 2025, that all of these schools will be community schools, right? I think 80% was their kind of conservative goal. So community schools are efficient and cost effective, right? And it's all about, because each community school has a full-time community school coordinator, right? A dedicated, and this is in state statute, and this is also in school board policy, required. You must have a full-time community school coordinator, and that is the person that is executing the community school strategy. For every dollar that we invest in a community school coordinator, they return over $7 in net benefits. Other research has shown up to $19 in net benefits, right, to the community. They've done lots of research in New Mexico. We had this really great researcher named Jeannie Oakes from California, and we were really blessed to have her with Community Schools, the coalition, for a while, and she did some really awesome research. But nationally, they've done tons of research, right? And all of this, as any kind of evidence-based model is, right, based when done to fidelity, community schools are proven to improve academic achievement, increase attendance, graduation rates, parent and family engagement, positive peer-adult relationships, and to reduce racial and economic opportunity and achievement gaps, right? Community schools, I can't say it enough, is an equity strategy, right? Okay, so what is that strategy? It's much more complex than this, but if I had to break it down really simple, like, well, what do you do in a community school, okay? So when we start a new community school, we don't go to a school and go, you're gonna be a community school. In fact, LCPS did that once and that didn't turn out well. Because in the schools, people in the schools are traumatized with change. Like traumatized by it over the years of all the things that, you know, they're like, we're going to do this. No, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. Here's this program. Here's this model. Here's this, you know, we're always trying to find all these different things to do to solve these problems. But there's been so much change in the school system that when people hear something new, they're like, it's painful, you know. So we actually engage, and I'm doing this with 2 schools right now. We engage the staff, the students, the parents, and the community in teaching them about community schools, and we try to empower them, and we hold a vote. And we let the school and the community vote, do you want to be a community school? And we've had schools in the district that we've gone and done this with, and they were like, no, thank you, right? For some reason, it's the kind of middle-class parents seem to not like community schools. For some reason, those schools where we have those mixed demographics is where we tend to get no's. And so they choose to be a community school, and then what do we do once we get there, right? The first year is really doing a deep needs and asset assessment, okay? How many social workers do I have in here? Okay, so a lot of you guys know what that is, right? That's what we do. That's what social workers do. That's what we should do, right? You know, we go into the community. We ask the students. We ask the parents. We ask everyone, the staff, you know, what needs do you have? You know, what do you love about your school? And what would you change about your school? And doesn't it kind of make sense? Isn't it kind of crazy in education that we're always sitting here, all these adults, and we're always talking and thinking about, well, what should we do for the kids? What kind of classes should we offer? What should we do? And how often do we ask the people what they want or need? How often? Right? I think not often enough. You know, there's a lot of value in that. So what we do is very data-driven, right? We spend, the goal is minimum 75% response rate on the surveys. Okay, so we're not taking like a random sample. I mean, we go knocking on doors. When themes emerge, we go deeper. We want to hold focus groups. You know, we really want to get to the root of, you know, what is going on in this community and in this school, and what do people need. But not just what they need, but what are the assets, right? What are the strengths? A lot of times there are assets and strengths in schools and communities and amongst staff that we can build upon, right? Things that people don't see, that they don't know. And so we're wanting to find that out too, right? What do you love about this school? What do you love about your community? What do you see as the assets here? So when we're done with that, we write a big report, right? And we present it to everyone. This is what our needs and asset assessment revealed. Everything in community schools is done through collaborative leadership, right? And what is that? Essentially, collaborative leadership is doing things democratically, right? The democratic process. And how many of you guys here work in education? Okay, so who comes when we have parent meetings? Who comes to PTO? Is it representative? Is it a representative group of parents that represent the parents of the school? It's not, right? Usually it's our more privileged parents, right, that are able to come to these meetings. How many times do you get monolingual Spanish-speaking parents that come to meetings, right? So a lot of times we base our decisions off of parent input of a group of parents that is not representative of our community, okay? And so in collaborative leadership, we want everyone's voice, we want everyone there, and we want everyone to feel like that they're part of making these decisions, okay? And so the community school coordinator is organizing these teams within the school to use collaborative leadership, to do the needs and asset assessment, and to come up with a strategic plan. Okay, and so a strategic plan is the really evidence-based, data-driven model that we use to start tackling some of these issues in the school and in the community, done through collaborative leadership. And so then they implement the strategic plan, right? And we don't just implement it, we use continuous improvement, right? We want to know it's not how much you do, it's how well you're doing it, right? Which is, I think, something else sometimes in public schools we're not the best at, right? We're counting how much do we do and not looking enough at how well are we doing it, right? So an example might be, and needs and asset assessments always reveal needs for mental health in the community, for parents and guardians, for students, staff. So let's take that, right? Let's say a needs and asset assessment revealed that 40% of students and staff and everyone said they had mental health needs. And so the community school coordinator works with collaborative leadership, and they get those services at the school, right? We get some therapists that are coming to see people, and maybe like, you know, a referral system that's really effective. So a quantity-based way of looking at that would say, well, you know, we brought in, let's say there was 100 individual cases of need. We brought in the capacity to serve those students, so therefore we are successful, right? But we want to take it a step further. We want to look at quality, right? We want to go back and ask those people, is this meeting your need, right? Because they might say, this really isn't, right? Like, we still feel bad, or maybe like, we don't like the therapist that comes here, or this isn't enough, right? Or I need home-based services, or I need more frequency with this, or more support. So looking at that quality piece is really important. And then sometimes you got to hit the brakes and go back and, kind of start over again. And then we end up doing another needs and asset assessment, right? Every 4 years in a community school, we do a huge one. But in between, we're sending out lots of little surveys and collecting data and doing the continuous. If anybody has a question, you can interrupt me at any point, okay? You don't even have to raise your hand. So this is kind of everything that I was saying. So in a community school, it's not a program. It's not something you bring in that lives in an office, right? The school becomes a community school, and everything in the school is seen through the lens of community schools, right? So, all the other things we got going on in schools, like MLSS and all of that, people see community schools as being kind of lateral in this list of things, when really a community school is the umbrella that everything else lives under. So everything that we do in the public schools, we're looking through the lens of the community school strategy, right? So we operate off of a 4-pillar model. There's also a 6-pillar model from the NEA, but there are 2 additional pillars are kind of, enveloped into these. The first one is integrated student supports, and this is what most people think of when they think of a community school, right? They think of the services and the programs, okay? A lot of community schools have school-based health centers. We're very blessed in LCPS that all of our high schools have school-based health centers, and there is lots of research that shows how much that helps with attendance and overall outcomes, educational outcomes, mental health outcomes. But even in our elementary schools and our middle schools, we're looking at this. In community schools, it's not about referring people out, it's about bringing this stuff into the school, which naturally removes so many barriers to why people aren't going out and getting these services. I think we live in a very judgmental society in America, and I hear lots of grumblings of that, right? We're real quick to be like, well, why don't they take them? Or why don't they go there? Or why haven't they taken care of this? Without stopping to think about the realities of people's lives, right? Someone who's like a single mom of 6 kids and has a car that barely works, and the schools are telling her she needs to take 3 of her kids to therapy at different places. These realities for people, there are many barriers for people accessing services in the community. And so research shows when you bring them to the school, it is greatly beneficial. At Lynn Community Middle School, they are partnered with Doñana Community College Dental Hygiene Program, and they come to the school and do kids' teeth at school. They have the residency program that comes in there, and right before the pandemic, they had plans drawn up to do a school-based health center. It would have been the first one in LCPS at a middle school. So still working towards that, but also having mental health services at school. Because in the public schools, our hands are really tied, right? I think the community they get mad at us sometimes, like, why aren't you guys doing more for mental health? I don't know what the average ratio is in LCPS, but I'm guessing it's probably like 1 counselor or social worker to about 400 or 500 students. It is not possible in the public schools for us to, and there's no funding to we can't magically, create more of these positions. We cannot do long-term therapy in the schools with the staff that we have, right? I mean, we're doing crisis intervention and we got to refer out. We don't have the capacity to do that. It has been difficult, and the district has tried to work with community agencies to bring them in, but there's not that person at the school that can facilitate that ongoing relationship with these agencies, and it's needed, right? And a community school coordinator does that. How can we work with agencies in the community to get providers at this school and have it work for the school and work for the agency and be kind of a seamless process? When people think of community schools, that when I talk to them, that's what I hear. They're like, oh yeah, it's like a program, and you guys bring in counselors and give people food. But that is something else. Most of our community schools do monthly food box drives, or drive up and you get a box of food, and we do all that stuff. Also, expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities. Community schools are typically open into the evening, right? At least 6 o'clock, have before school programming and summer programming at the school, right? Where the school is kind of open year-round. Also part of this is this notion of schools being open to the community, that the community can use school facilities, right? Let's say people in the community get together and they want to do like a bridge club or a quilting club or hold some kind of community meeting. You know, we invite the community into a community school instead of having kind of more of those, I think, rigid boundaries, right? Where a community feels like kind of that's the school and you don't go in there unless you have a kiddo. You know, we want more open doors with our community. The enriched learning, so community schools is really big about project-based learning and community-based learning. And we recently partnered with Community Share, well, not recently, but they were awarded a Kellogg grant as well. And we're trying to get this off the ground. And Community Share, it's an online platform. It's like Match.com for people in the school system and the community. It's really awesome. Anybody in here can make a profile. You can make a profile as an educator or as a community member, right? And it doesn't matter what your skills or talents are, like you know how to quilt, you know how to cook, you know a lot about Southwestern plants. Like there's no qualification for this. You go on and you make a profile, like I'm Amanda Barela and I like chickens and ducks and I know a lot about them. She's laughing because I really do. This is true. And come tell you all about chickens and ducks. And so a teacher has a profile and they might be like, hey, I want someone to come talk to my class about chickens and ducks. And so they're going to contact me and I'm going to come into class and maybe I'll bring one of my chickens and show them the chicken and talk about the... Do you all remember, I don't know if you guys are as old as I am, you know, when I was young, it seemed like more people came into the schools. Didn't more people come into the schools? Don't you remember people come in and they'd talk to us and they'd show us things and people's parents would come in? What happened to that? I don't know. But we're trying to bring it back. We're trying to bring it back. And so community-based learning, yes.
Well, you know, that's the change in our culture. You know, COVID, I think, is kind of the capper on this, but the sense of safety within schools, right?
Right.
And the sense of school shootings and the sense of, if you look like Glenn, I was at Glenn before all of the big fences went up, and that was a whole open area. But, you know, then there was a whole movement, all this money came into fencing schools. And
Yep.
locks on the doors and check-ins and all this kind of
right.
stuff. I think there was a general discouragement
yes.
of having people come in, right? You got to check in, you got to go through the screens, you got to do, and then COVID is even bigger.
Oh, yeah.
So how does that jive with, you know, the function of a community school within the barriers of what we have with our society today? I mean, it's
right.
hard.
Well, we're trying to break those down. So community schools gets a little bit of, I think, different rules than other schools. So we're just like, come on in, right? I mean, you know, you spend a certain amount of time in public schools, you have to get a background check, all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, my personal opinion, I think we live in a society that is becoming increasingly more fear-based and paranoia-based, and that people think that doing a lot of this stuff is protective and not recognizing what is detrimental, you know, to children. And like, we're just now, you know, really finding out all these active shooting drills that we were doing with kids, how much it traumatized them. Traumatized them. You know, we thought we were keeping them safe by teaching them how to do this. We traumatize them.
Well, the message you're sending is that the world is a dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. I'm a therapist, and I've had a couple of those kiddos in my office, and I actually just had one over this past summer. He didn't want to go back to school when it opened up because he thought there was going to be an active shooter, because he was doing active shooter drills in school before the pandemic. So, yeah, it's sad. It's sad, but we need to, you know, kind of stop that mentality. We need to partner with our community, invite our community into our schools. Even sexual abuse, you know, people are so afraid about letting their children like walk to school or ride their bike around the neighborhood. And, you know, there's this misconception that like, you know, some stranger is going to come grab your kid and sexually abuse them, or that is not what research shows, right? It's your father, your stepfather, your uncle, and your cousin who's most likely to sexually assault you. It's someone you know, but in a society, we live in this fear. We don't let children do anything because we think there's this danger out there that there really isn't, right? So, okay, so this is what talking with Amanda is like. I go off in a ditch, back out of the ditch. I'm like talking about monkeys and, okay. Active family and community engagement. So again, what's happened in schools? I remember when I was little, everybody's mom was in the PTO. If you weren't in the PTO, you were like a weirdo, right? Everybody's mom was in the PTO. Well, we live in a society now, we don't have as many parents that are stay-at-home moms. They don't have as much time to participate in the schools, right? Increasingly, both parents have to work. Sometimes both parents are working 2 different jobs. And then there's become this culture of us not collaborating with the community as much. And so this has led to a serious problem with parental engagement in the schools. It is a serious, serious problem. Many parents, they don't want to answer our phone calls. They don't want to come in. They don't want to talk to us. Lots of different reasons for that. But, in community schools, we want to try and fix that. We want to ask these parents and know, why don't you come to the school? Right? Is the front office lady mean? Is she rude? Yeah, sometimes they are. Okay, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say it. Sometimes they are, right? I wouldn't want to either. Somebody biting my head off or hanging up, But we don't know till we ask them, right? Or sometimes parents say, you have all this stuff at the school and it starts at 4. We don't get out of work till 6. If you had it at 6:30, we would be there. But we don't take the time to ask what the barriers are to parents coming. And so we want to find out. And then students, how often do we ask students, what do you want to do in school? What bothers you about school? Right? What do you want to be different about your school? Kids are more likely to come to school if there's something they're excited about. I used to work in attendance, and I can't tell you how many times the kid wasn't coming to school because the teacher said something mean to him, or something happened at school, right? They're avoiding coming to school, but, we're not asking kids, why don't you want to come to school? After school programs, activities, yeah, Leandra.
Sorry. So the 2 middle ones are that. Do you guys do any type of creative scheduling as far as staff, anything like that? Like a non-traditional schedule as far as the work day? Do you provide programs with evenings?
Oh, how do we? Yes, so we do, and we pay EHAs, extra hour agreements, right? So we do have a lot of grant money, and so right now we are able to pay school staff that works after hours, extra hour agreements. So that's how we do it. So not so much kind of, because with a union and everything, you can't really change people's technical work contracts, but we pay EHAs, and there's a lot of school staff that is wonderful and passionate and wants to help kids and, are very willing to do this for the EHAs. Leadership and practices, again, we're trying to so community schools isn't always the most popular thing because of this. Because we're trying to change the status quo of how schools are run, right? A typical school, schools and the school district has a very military style structure, right, of power, right? The principal is in power, they're the boss, they make all the decisions, and, and then it trickles down, and there's these chains of command and stuff that can be very ineffective in advancing a school forward, right? Because we're not listening to other people's opinions. And some administrators are really great about that, and they do listen and they ask and stuff like that, but it's usually with the staff, right? We're never asking the parents, we're never asking the community, we're not asking the students. And so in collaborative leadership, right, we have a community school advisory council, we have parents and leaders of agencies that we partner with, and students and staff, and everybody sits down at a table and goes, okay, these are the issues that we're tackling, and what are we going to do about this, right? So it's that involvement, engagement, and more democratic process of making decisions. So this was one of the 2 slides I made for this presentation. So yada, 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 research. Rates of depression and anxiety have really been skyrocketing amongst youth. And not just amongst youth, in our society in general, right, in America. Over the last, I think, 30, 40 years, we have seen very sharp increases, especially in the last decade, in people reporting depression and anxiety. Do we see this in all countries? Nope, we don't. It's not like all over the world, people's rates of depression and anxiety are skyrocketing. It is certain cultures, we are seeing more and more of this. Very capitalistic, individualistic societies are seeming to have this problem a lot more than societies where they have more of a social safety net, more of a collectivistic kind of culture where people are more concerned about each other. And it's really become problematic, and it's become something very problematic, you know, in the schools and with our youth. Because again, going back to our ratio of mental health people per pupils, I mean, we're just busting at the seams. You know, our people that work in mental health in the public schools are like, oh, this is insane, right? The amount of kids. I worked in a school when we were having a lot of problems with cutting, self-harming. And I mean, I'd be there till 8 o'clock at night, you know, night after night, you know, just trying to deal with this because we don't have capacity. But I think the question that I, you know, wanted to kind of pose is, you know, what has changed in the last decade that might contribute to this? What has changed in our society? Social media. What is different with kids nowadays? What do you guys notice versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago? They don't read books, right? Why don't they read books? Yeah. Electronics, right? That's everyone. Right. Lack of supervision. How many of our students go home? And a lot of people think there's like some magic age you're not supposed to leave a kid alone, and there's actually not. I mean, a 5-year-old can go home alone, be a latchkey kid as long as they have access to a phone, and there's no safety issues. Like there's not, a lot of people think like, you can't leave a kid. That's actually not true. But how many of our kids are going home alone? Right? I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think just optimism too. I think that there's been a real decrease in optimism. And
right.
Part of that may be, you know, certain, you know, big issues like COVID and stuff, but also the sense that, you know, that a lot of things are unattainable, like owning a home.
Yes.
Or getting a good job, or being able to go through college. I mean, it seems like that now this group, this generation sees that those as unattainable goals almost, that the gap has widened and widened. So there's that lack of optimism that, you know, I can really do this. And so yeah, I think that really contributes to it in depression.
Yeah, hope, right? Loss of hope. Absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think at the same time, with the whole technology piece, and even sizes of different homes and stuff like that, we still disconnected in our connection. It can cause physical depression and still, like, they don't really think their parents were there, or even, you know, while they're on the phone too.
Right. The parents are on the phones too, especially these younger parents. Sorry, I'm older than I look, so they're like, how old is this lady? But man, when I get like younger parents sometimes, and I'm trying to talk, and they're like on their phone, you know, I teach at NMSU too, and I have banned electronics. Banned. Like, you cannot have your cell phone out. What do? I still stand like this. They got it like under the, like, y'all addicted. Like, you can't even have it on your lap. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say my teenage daughter who's in high school, she pointed out something that I thought was really interesting. I had called my grandkids, hey, we're tweeting. She said, we love to tweet Mom. She goes, you're 10, and then all of a sudden you're a teenager. And all the tweeting ones are so exposed to technology and world and trying to do that. And, you know, sort of observing my grandkids who are 11, 10 and 11, you know, they're actually just so much more than that. And so I know as a granddaughter,
yeah. I was reading that 80% of children under the age of 10 have viewed pornography online before they reach 10. 80%. Because of the access to the internet, right? So, yeah. Did anybody read that article in the newspaper that our director of mental health, Amy Himmelwright, wrote? Man, you should look it up. It is spot on. I mean, she was just talking about, you know, it was an article about suicide, but talking about, you know, what leads to this? What leads to someone feel that disconnected and hopeless. And yeah, technology is a piece of it, right? But our youth they're disconnected, right? It's relationships. There's also, they've done research out there in psychology. When you're on social media and you're texting people, you think you're socializing, but your brain does not respond as if you're socializing. Unless we are looking in the presence of another human, looking at humans' faces in person, your brain does not recognize that you're getting social contact. Do you know that? It doesn't.
Yeah, I think that's a product of where we've really seen that happen is because of COVID now.
Yes.
When, with our kids coming back to some of our programs and schools and such, how much they missed that aspect of being with each other, and they didn't even know that they missed it. But and how much it hurt them to not have it,
Yes, right. How much did COVID further us down into this pit of lack of connectedness to other human beings, right? And it's not just the kids, it's us too. It's us adults too, right? How much are we sitting there texting and messaging people and looking at my ducks on Facebook instead of spending time with like an actual human being in person, or human touch? Babies die when they're not touched. They die. You can give them food, they can be warm, you don't hold a baby, it dies, right? Children need to be touched. Humans need touch, right? They need hugs. When I get families that are in trouble, that's the first homework I give them. And it's oftentimes very awkward tension hugs at first, right? But I say, I want you guys every day when you see each other, hug, and when you leave, hug, right? So it's first like that. All right, and then, yeah, man, but sometimes simple things, big results. But anyhow, tying it back to community schools, that's one of our biggest pushes, right, is connecting people, connecting our schools with the community, our community with the schools. Something I've been thinking about lately, there's also a lot of problems with the elderly being isolated in communities, right? They don't have people that come visit them. Maybe their children have moved away. Why don't we partner with the elderly population in our community and the schools? Mutually beneficial, right? Those partnerships and those relationships. Why don't we in public education send information home to parents about the dangers of technology and lack of socialization? Why don't we do more of that? We can. We got access to almost all of them. Shouldn't we? Blasting this out, emailing it out, sending stuff home, having groups. I think it's just such a huge problem. Everyone's like, what do you do? What do you do about that, I tell parents individually all the time, like, you got less than 2 hours a day. You got to watch it. You got to learn. Giving parents tools. I have taught so many parents how to, on their internet, like shut off a kid's phone at 10 o'clock at night. We could send that stuff home to parents. We could help them. We could have like a helpline or something, right? Like, you want to be able to spy on your kids' electronics or shut stuff off? Like, come learn how. Because they don't know a lot of times, right? Anything else anybody wanted to talk about, kind of the rise in depression and anxiety?
Oh, go ahead. The only thing I was going to say that I've noticed, at least in my community or my family, is that with all of this access to information, people are able to actually label or identify depression or anxiety, because in some cultures, it's normalized to have it, and
right.
It is what it is, you know what I mean? This is why it's become being an adult, and now children are having the access to be able to be like, I think I'm depressed, because you saw that in my family.
Right.
With my younger siblings or younger cousins, and they're out there saying that, there's someone who dies in depression, and my grandma doesn't know what to do with that information. She's like, what do you mean? Like, you're a child, that's why,
right.
Don't worry about it, and then it's escalating into acts of self-harm, or, threats of suicide, things like that. And a lot of it has to do with we're giving children access to information about how to self-identify or ask for help.
Right.
But we don't ask for the coping mechanism for the parents to bridge that gap.
Yeah.
Like, what do we do? Okay, you think that you have this, you need to educate the caregivers.
Right.
And then offer
Let's get NAMI in our schools, to help parents, right? But some of it too. I'm reading this really great book called The Coddling of the American Mind. It's a really great book. But some too, right, is that I think sometimes we over-pathologize things. Like there's a difference between sadness and depression. There's a difference between grief and depression. And, you know, a lot of times I think people's, you know, difficulties that they're going through are very normal reactions to what they've kind of been through. So I'm trying not to rant too much about that, because anyone that knows me knows I will go in a dark hole with that. And then I threw it in again here. But, well, you know, what's the difference between prevention versus treatment, right? Because I think I said I was going to talk about this. And one of my criticisms of the mental health system in America is that we are overly focused on treatment. We're obsessed with treatment. Obsessed with treatment. How are we going to treat trauma? How are we going to treat this? What are we going to do with all these kids that are throwing chairs across the room? We've got to treat it. We got to treat it. What if we prevented it, right? That's what Mayor Pro Tem Gondota was talking about. That's what resilience leaders and NAHA, you know, that's what we're trying to do in the community. What if we had less kids that had ACEs? What if parents knew where they could go if they were going through a divorce, like at their local school, right? That they could go for help and somebody could provide that help in a time that maybe would help the parents to split in a more amicable manner and that didn't become an ACE for that kid. You know, more parents being aware of, you know, warning signs of abuse and intervening sooner, you know, or domestic violence, right? You know, more parents being aware, where can I go for help with this? How can I get out? And schools are just such a natural place to have these things. They go in there all the time. They trust us, well, sometimes, but, right? They should trust us and should feel like they can come there and say, hey, you know, I'm going through this and I'm worried how it's going to affect my kid. We can prevent a lot of this stuff. We can prevent a lot of this stuff. It's probably one of my biggest rants that I go on. Why don't we do more prevention? People do prevention, but in the schools, why don't we do more prevention? Early childhood education, pre-K, Head Start, DD Pre, right? What if we started getting information and support to parents then, right? What if we started intervening then, instead of waiting till it's a third grader that's throwing a desk across the room and we're going, okay, treatment, right? What are we gonna do here? So I hope to like instill, I don't know, some passion in you all, you know, for that to look. It's just looking at things through a different lens, right? There's always a place for treatment. We always need treatment, you know, but how can we prevent things more, right? Everybody knows about ACEs. You probably feel like I do, right? If somebody sits there and explains what ACEs are one more time, I'm gonna like walk out of the room. You know, but how can our community help respond to this? How can our community help get involved in bringing the ACEs down in our community? You know, what Gondota was saying is so true. You know, bad people don't abuse kids. I mean, there are psychopaths out there, what, like you say now, 3 to 4% of the population, but stressed out parents abuse kids. Most children that have been abused, their parents love them. They love them dearly. They are stressed out. They are going through horrible times. They don't have resources. They need help, right? They need help. I was just in a CYFD presentation, and poor CYFD, they're there to help. They want to help, but you know, the stigma, right, of like baby snatchers, they have a difficult relationship with the community. Schools need to have a good relationship with the community, and we can be the place that disseminates and provides this prevention because we're the only thing in society that has access to all of the children, right? But we have to partner with our communities to get this done. We don't have the resources. You know, a community school coordinator is what is able to coordinate all of this in a school and make it happen rather than it being thrown on everyone else's plate, like all of us that work in the public schools knows how that goes, right? Other duties as assigned. Anybody have any thoughts or anything they want to say about prevention? Like thoughts on it?
I think a lot of money doesn't go towards prevention or it's valued at the state funding level.
Right.
And then it's very hard to get hard numbers for data to say that
Yeah.
On a community or whatever for a whole bunch of time to measure
Yeah.
versus treatment. And I think a lot of people are unaware of the
Mhm.
whole downstream kind of prevention model
Right.
versus treatment. And as a society, we're more reactive than we are proactive. And so
Right.
that combination and everything makes it very difficult to value, understand, get the funding, and get the data to say it's working, get this model to implement.
Yeah, right, right, absolutely. And what about mental health in the schools? How much could we do to prevent? Right? We got to be careful because just teaching people about disorders is not good. That's kind of that over pathologizing stuff. You sit down and you tell little kids like, this is generalized anxiety disorder, and I don't know. I don't believe that that's particularly helpful. You know, kids know when they don't feel well, but that definitely kind of brings me to the next one, like the disease model of mental health, right? Our entire mental health system is built off of the disease model of mental health, right? You know, this was many decades ago, a theory came out that if you are struggling with mental health stuff, it's because you have a chemical imbalance, right? The chemical imbalance theory. And this became the theory upon which our mental health system was built. And, you know, how does that theory erode treatment, effective treatment, and how we see treatment? Because if we follow that theory, then what is the cure?
Increase your SSRI.
Right. Medication and therapy. Right? That's it. If we buy into that, then that's what it is. And so if we buy into that, what can you do? What can you do to prevent that? If we think that's the problem. All right? Be aware of like your family's mental health history. I mean, depression and anxiety rates have not been exploding because genetically all of our genes are like rapidly mutating, right? It's because of changes in society, in our community, and we can prevent those. We can work on those. We can help kids feel more connected. We can get, good relationships with adults and children and mentors and, enriching activities and healthier communities. So just something to think about. How does the disease model of mental health maybe, create barriers for us in thinking innovatively about how we can prevent these adverse mental health outcomes in our youth. And then the role of evaluation. We're supposed to, I don't know, in my profession, it's in our code of ethics, right? We're supposed to evaluate what we do. How many of us actually evaluate what we do? And I'm not criticizing because I know nobody got time for that. Okay, nobody got time for that. I know that, but we don't, right? Because we don't have time for that. But so it goes back to the quantity versus kind of quality thing. Okay, yes, we saw 40 kids last week. Did it help them? We don't have to do some like single subject design and, call in a researcher, but we can ask them. We can ask them if our services are effective or if it helped them or if there's something that we could do differently. Because I've been a social worker in the district for a long time. Even 10 years ago when I had interns, I would make them do that. They'd have like a caseload, and at the end of the year, I would have them give a survey to the kids that they were seeing for feedback. What did I do that was most helpful to you? What would you have liked me to do different? Was there anything that bothered you? What were you hoping to get out of it? Where are you at now? Do you feel like you need more services? And it was surprising what the kids would say, But I think that's not a hard thing to do, but that's kind of using that community school strategy that, right, empowering the community that we serve to drive the services that we're providing for them. Because we get a lot in those like power things, right? Like we're the experts and we know, so we're going to tell you what's wrong. Yeah.
In your model school, do you do a survey with the high school students? Or do you do a cookie cutter approach and then do you do that to kind of get a sense of what they would like to have?
Oh, yeah.
Services? Yeah.
Oh, at any community school, whether it's elementary, middle, or high, the entire student body is surveyed. The entire staff is surveyed, all of the parents, and then also the community, the surrounding community. people that live in the community.
Is there a high school here?
No, not yet. That is uncharted territory, and it is difficult to get in. Just because, you know, does anybody here work in high school?
I think just, with access.
Yeah, I mean, it would be amazing at a high school.
With, our buildings, our technical education.
Yes. Yes, yeah.
Blown away that the city hasn't focused
Right,
and really tried to implement that. I know we're trying to our school.
right.
And we're seeing some good things, but that's the same one.
Yeah.
Majority of our kids aren't going to go to college.
Right, and that's fine. Thank you for saying that, you know?
Learning hands-on.
Right,
Learning how to data transfer, how to put infrastructure in, and that's the key to that.
yeah,
And science right there, and the kids would thrive on that.
yes.
I'm shocked it's been since Martinez was here.
Uh-huh,
And then, he had talked about all of this, and it's like, dude, we're here 20 years later, and we still don't have it. And-
right.
And it's pieces. We're
Bureaucracy.
in the prime spot for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's kind of too, I don't know. In a high school, I mean, it's difficult to get in with community school just because there is more like middle class parents and they're more like weirded out by it, but it's necessary. And we went through this thing in society where we were obsessed with college, and we brainwashed all these parents into thinking if they didn't send their kids to college that they were failures, and brainwashed kids into. I've been fighting the district about that for a long time too. Like, we got to stop this. How many people have bachelor's degrees out there and are in debt, and it did nothing for them because they thought they had to go and they felt like a failure if they weren't. And now what's happened? We don't have plumbers, we don't have electricians, we don't have people in these trades that oftentimes make much more money than we do, right? We have diminished and devalued very important professions in our society.
Or like athletics, activities.
Yes.
That so many kids can't afford, because if you want to play on the team,
Right,
you have to pay $1,000.
exactly.
It's like,
Yeah.
how are you going to do that?
Those of us that work with the disadvantaged kids, like, why don't we have more? And, if it was a community school and kids said, look, this is a problem, I want to play on the football team, I don't have $1,000, and, the community school coordinator is going to go out in the community and say, how can we fix this? Maybe businesses in our community will sponsor these kids, right? What?
Yeah, use those resources, create like intramural programs.
Yeah,
Instead of, it doesn't have to be, it can be competitive. but
Right.
it's fun.
right,
And it's stuff that doesn't have to be, costly.
right. But there's something power about data, right, and graphs, and when we survey everyone and we have a graph or data and a bar chart that says, 20% of kids at this school would like to play a sport, and say finances are a barrier. That gets people's attention. Like, anecdotally, we know, we see, we hear these kids here and there, but there's something powerful about, having that data and showing it to people, the magnitude, right, of this. Yes?
Well, I think, do you, the sense of like a value shift in that kind of sense of a community school, do you find some sense in that of the, impacting the community and the culture of the school as a whole, rather than saying, hey, we're essentially a preparatory academy trying to get these kids to pass the, whatever state exam we're doing today, but it's more like we are here to help our community and to help all be together. And, and that's the thing with social media, it invites so much comparison.
Right.
It invites comparison at a distance, and that
Yep.
sense of comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes.
So I'm seeing all of this stuff that I'm not, right? But if your community is, we are here, we're all here in a whole, we're right here now, and this is all what we're doing. I mean, do you get that sense of some of these community schools of that shift to, being present and being, kind of helping one another and the value shift?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Although it's slow moving. Like, I'm not going to lie. Changing the culture and attitudes in any institution is never easy or quick, right? So in a community school, it takes on average 3 to 4 years for the community school to be really like well established and going, because people are like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What is this, right? Change is difficult. And so, we have to be kind of like methodical and slow about that too. And some people jump on right away and others are kind of wary and stand on the sidelines. They'll be there, but they don't want to get their hands in it, and some people, you know, kind of resistant. But, you know, for whatever reason, and a set of reasons, I think that, you know, in the public schools, that our trust with the community is not there, right? And rebuilding, I think, that trust and getting people to see our public schools in Las Cruces differently, you know? So I used to work in attendance. We used to have this really punitive attendance law. We would send home letters to probably like half the district every year telling them that we were going to turn them over to the district attorney's office. It was common practice. Well, we live in a punishing society, right? We erroneously believe in our society that if you threaten to punish people, it changes their behavior, although there's not a lick of research that supports that. But we keep doing it. It's like, you know, putting people in jail. They're addicted to drugs. Zero research to support that curbs their drug use, but we keep doing it. And so, you know, this, I don't know, you know, the notion of punishment has eroded trust with our communities, that they now see the public schools as a threat, right? Instead of our response being, hey, you know, what's going on? Can I help you? You know, I'm going to turn you into the DA. I'm going to call CYFD on you, instead of, can I help you, right? And sometimes, yeah, we have to call CYFD when things are really bad. Sometimes people call CYFD too much, right?
But it's also tough, though, to provide that support, but it's fine. And they're trying to do what you can, and you want to do it for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, but why don't they want it? You know, maybe it's not. And then, too, and when we think of mental health treatment, what do we think of? A therapist? That's not what everyone believes treatment is. You know, people want to see native healers or curandera or, you know, go see a yabera or their uncle or, you know, but we have like a Western model of mental health treatment that I think, you know, not all the times we're ready to present people with different options of healing. So I think that we could stand to, I'm late on time, right? Lunchtime. Okay, thanks for coming.